In today's world, professional drag racing is a big business and a fully developed pro motorsport on the level of anything else you're going to see across the world. But 60 years ago, in the formative years of competition, during the decade of the swinging 60s, it was completely and utterly wide open. For every Don Garlits or Don Prudhomme who raced like they'd not live to see another day if they lost, there were guys like Sheldon Konblett, Bob Davis, and Junior Brogdon. Those three guys will make up the triumvirate of owners and operators of the cars we're looking at today. Three of the most fun, freaky, and wacky California funny cars in an era when the only rule was getting paid and having fun to do it at the drag strip. By the time 1966 rolled around, Sheldon "Shell" Konblett was living the life. He had built a successful business with his service center speed shop in Compton, California, had raced a series of interesting cars, including a little British car with a big American motor, and even a hot-rodded Aston Martin, but he wanted the next big thing, and I mean that in the most literal sense. As the story of this car, Peanuts, the largest funny car in the history of drag racing, goes, Konblett had become kind of fixated on the concept of making a funny car out of a large luxury vehicle. Now, he didn't see it for raw performance, he saw it for fun and the fact that track operators would pay appearance money for a car like that because it would draw spectators through the gate. And as it does with guys like Shell, fate intervened. When the new full-size Fords came out in 1965, engineers made an interesting discovery. Their improved methods of construction with a stiffened body and a more forgiving chassis, as well as better materials used in their building process, had actually netted them a car that was quieter inside than the Rolls-Royce luxury cars of the day. I'm not kidding. They did the tests and everything. Ford executives capitalized on this concept with an advertising campaign called the Quiet Man campaign. They ran TV ads and print ads, and heck, even all the ads that they made in any form trumpeted the car's quality and quietness. And the company went to great lengths to generate publicity around this concept as well. In fact, Ford built a lightweight shell of a Galaxy that looked like a real car. The reason they did this was because it was to be helicoptered to the top of a mountain for a TV publicity shoot. When this mountain project was completed, the body was slated to be destroyed. Now, somehow, a friend of Konblett's either at Ford or the ad agency told him that the shell had gone to California to be stripped of its trim and that it was going to be burned, having done its job. Through some wizardry, and likely a bunch of phone calls and promises, Konblett got the body. And this thing was wild. It had a steel roof with a vinyl top, and the entire rest of the car was made of 1-inch thick fiberglass. The massive body with that roof and with the huge fiberglass usage weighed 600 pounds. Now, since Ford or the agency had stripped most of the trim and chrome off the side, they replaced that missing trim with stuff they bought from a Ford dealership. Over the course of 2 months of nights and weekends, they built a chassis out of 2x3 mild steel box tubing and put a roll bar in it, and that chassis weighed 175 pounds. They set the thing on a set of Astro wheels, put some Goodyear slicks on the back, and voila, the world had its first ever luxury funny car. Why did they name it Peanuts? Because Sheldon liked the comic strip. Easy as that. The body was a 1-to-1 scale piece of a Ford LTD. The car had a 131-inch wheelbase, semi-elliptical springs on the corners, a Ford 9-inch Outback with 410 gears, and an art car torque flight. Now, the engine was a blown motor, and that's set where the dashboard of a normal LTD would be. The first engine in the car was a blown big block Chevy, and that was only in there as a tester. They used this engine to make some test runs down the drag strip to make sure the handling of the car was okay and that it wasn't going to fall apart on the way down the track. As they were sorting it out, they were building a flat-tappet cam-equipped, stock-headed, 671 blown, 392 Chrysler that would run on fuel. With that motor in it, this behemoth of a car ran in the 8-second a lap time range at around 160 miles an hour. A 14-foot parachute was used to stop the car, and Konblett used to claim the whole thing weighed 3,200 pounds. Now that seems a little heavy to me, and he wanted this to be a big heavy luxury car, so you may have been embellishing somewhat, but let's be real. This thing was a heavyweight by any measure. But it wasn't the heaviest funny car in California, because we're going to get to that one in a minute. A couple more things on Peanuts. There were a few major problems with the car at first, and that was the fact that at 140 miles an hour, the body, which had that huge front end on it, additionally it had that gargantuan empty engine bay that had nothing in it, was acting as a massive low pressure area, was causing the front end to get light at the top end. And not just get light, at over 140 miles an hour, it would pull the front end up and do wheelies across the finish line. They hung 250 pounds of lead off the front axle to keep the nose down, and that didn't work. But what did was putting a windshield in the car. That windshield worked like a giant spoiler, and the air acted as a big hand to keep the front of the nose down. And through the course of a busy 1966 season into 1967, Konblett, as well as drivers like D. Keaton, drove the car relentlessly at match races and appearances at places like Lions Drag Strip, San Fernando, Irwindale, and a host of others. It would get booked in with regularity. The people loved it. Anytime you got to see something this big, going that fast, trying to take out much more normal competition, who isn't rooting for this massive car? One of the weirdest parts of this whole story is the fact that after the car was retired sometime in 1967, there is no record of what happened to it. It just disappears. It's never surfaced in anyone's collection. Seemingly no one's ever found the body, and the hard reality is the car was likely just cut up and thrown away as yesterday's freaky race car. Perhaps the greatest irony of this luxury car, funny car, is its price. Konblett claimed to have $2,000 total tied up into this thing. Everything about it was done bargain basement. They got the body basically for free. The chassis was built with stuff they had laying around the shop, and the engine was as cheaply as you could put together a 392 Hemi to run on fuel. Luxury car body, yes. Luxury car budget, no. But as a follow-up act, Shell had something up his sleeve. He built a Jaguar XKE flopper named Snoopy. Now, unfortunately, this car took the life of the driver hired to pilot it one night in a bad crash, but the car was actually saved and has since been restored. The driver who lost his life on that horrible night was named Johnny Hoffman. He went by Mac. In his own career in life, Sheldon Konblett became a massive figure in the aftermarket. He grew his service center chain to become one of the preeminent speed shop chains throughout California. Because of this, he became a force within the SEMA organization, and he was actually the guy who designed the trophies that SEMA still gives out to this day, which recognize innovation and excellence in the aftermarket. So that's the quick and dirty story of Peanuts, and I mentioned that it wasn't the heaviest funny car in California because the next one is. Bob Davis thought he really had something interesting with his big block A-stock 65 Impala drag car in 1965. Unfortunately, no one else really did. Davis was annoyed that no one gave his car, a big, fast machine, a second look. He'd see these wild match race cars getting all the love, and the class racers were just playing second or even third fiddle at a lot of events. So rather than sit around and mope, Bob Davis came up with a plan. He was going to join the club of match racers, and people would surely care about a 150-mile-an-hour version of his same car, right? Oh, yes. Yes, he was. First calling his friends Mike Carty, Bill Carr, and Norm Weekly at Competition Paint and Body for a sponsorship, Davis went to work. His 3,980-pound stock Impala went on a diet. The fenders, trunk, hood, and other panels of the car went to fiberglass. The interior was stripped out, the gauges and other stuff removed. He laid down some thin carpet and put a fiberglass bucket seat in there, and that was basically it for the essentials. Now, the real fun happened with the drivetrain. Davis was a talented engine builder, so he set to work with a 427 Chevy. He went through it end to end, got the block perfectly machined, replaced the pistons, kept the stock rods, worked the heads over, and prepared it for a very unique piece of speed equipment. Being close with a man named DeMar Ray at Krager Industries netted him the very first Krager blower intake manifold for a big block Chevy that they ever made. Not the first model, the first one, period. He was actually the guy that tested this product out for the company before they sold it. On top of that manifold went a 671 blower. On top of that, an old-school Enderley twin-door injector, and that fed the engine a straight load of methanol. Later, port nozzles were added when nitromethane became part of the program, but in 1966, when the car debuted, it was running on straight alcohol. Art Carr modified a TorqueFlite transmission for use. That transmission was linked to the engine through a 2100 RPM stall converter, and it spun a 456 geared 12-bolt rear axle. There were 10.5-inch wide Goodyear slicks on the corners, and he shifted the transmission with a push-button setup on a stand in the cockpit, and he would shift the car at 7,000 RPM on runs. He only made one real modification to the frame. Davis welded in a small tubular crossmember ahead of the engine, and then he cut the factory crossmember in the middle. With that gaping hole opened up, he welded flanges to the frame, and then made a piece of tubing with matching flanges on its end, and voila! He had basically a bolt-in and easily removable center section of the crossmember so he could get to the oil pan to check the bottom end of the engine, bearings and all, when he was racing it. It's nothing special, but to me it's just kind of one of those thoughtful, neat racer tweaks. Drenched in green paint and carrying the name the Jolly Green Giant on the rear quarter panels, Bob Davis was off to the races. This car was capable of running 150 miles an hour on straight alcohol, and he went even faster, up to 160 miles an hour when they put the nitro to it. The rear suspension was 100% stock. The left rear coil was cut down 2 inches, but other than that, the car didn't use traction bars, it used nothing. It was stock parts in the rear end. The front end had a maximum of 2.5 inches of travel. That's it, period. And Davis did admit in interviews that the car was really a handful to drive at full speed ahead. Now, the car was a match race hit, and it even ran some of the big meets. For instance, here's video of the car at the 1966 NHRA Winter Nationals in Pomona. This footage was shot by my friend Dar Hawthorne when he was a kid. His dad had given him a 16mm camera for Christmas and got him starting line access at the Winter Nationals, and he was down there shooting away. As we can see, this was not a banner run for the Jolly Green Giant, but just looking at this thing in action is absolutely spectacular. Now, what's even more wild is this car made the perfect match race partner for the Peanuts LTD. These guys ran tons of match races against each other because crowds love the idea of two massive cars beating up on each other at 150 miles an hour, blown nitro-burning engines screaming down the track. There are newspaper clippings galore from this era in Southern California that put these two cars on center stage at many racetracks on many weekends. Davis would go on to race a more sensible Corvette funny car for a short time after the Impala, before family health issues caused him to focus his time on caring for his family members and operating his business. He was a good dude. He stepped away from drag racing to do the things any good-hearted person would do. His funny car career was short, but the Jolly Green Giant certainly made it notable. And that leaves us with one funny left. Junior Brogdon began his drag racing career in the first half of the 60s with a series of successful Ford stock and superstock entries. Eventually, he got the itch to go faster like Bob Davis, and he also saw the glory and the dough available to the guys running funny cars, such as they were at the time. And remember, when we say funny cars at this time in history, that means anything you can dream up and make. Now, also like Bob Davis, he knew that standing out from the crowd was going to be the hot ticket to getting attention and getting booked by track promoters. And what he did certainly got attention. Brogdon effectively mounted a highly modified Mustang shell over the top of a short-ish dragster chassis. With its pinch width and cartoonishly long hood, the car was called the Phony Pony. Brogdon's melon was positioned in the dragster Mustang back window, and as interesting as it must be to look down a front-engine dragster and see the front wheels way out ahead of you, imagine peering down this aircraft carrier landing deck hood. Unbelievable. The car began its life with a nitro-injected 289 that was brought out to about 350 cubic inches. At one point, the car used 2 of these engines hooked in tandem at the same time. Now, that was very short-lived because Brogdon could never get them to work correctly when they were hooked together. Ditching the 2 engines, he put a blower on a single engine, and that was the most commonly run setup in this race car. The blown small block Ford on nitro at least brought that Ford badge some credibility here with the Phony Pony. What is very interesting, though, as you read reports and understand the context of the time, this car was not a huge fan favorite, and that might have been the real genius of Junior Brogdon. Promoters booked this car into open shows and other events, as it was, of course, not legal for any sort of sanctioned class-style legal competition. This was the definition of a pure match race machine. We also have to remember at the time, match races like these funny car shows were basically like wrestling events. It was a show with heroes and villains and plot twists and announcers getting people whipped up. Brogdon's car was the perfect foil for announcers and beer-swilling fans to get fired up about. It wasn't a, quote, real car like the more traditional-looking beasts, but it was quick enough to be fun. The thing ran low 8s at nearly 170 miles an hour. Now, being that it was a blown small block Ford on nitro, it apparently also liked to blow up as much as it actually ran, but come on! Look at this thing and try not to smile. The point of this whole exercise is that not only did these 3 cars exist, they existed at the same time. and ran many, many of the same events together during those endless 1960s summers of California funny car match racing madness. The other thing that these three cars have in common is that they very rarely left the state of California. Brogdon occasionally traveled to Arizona, as did Konblett, but that was about it. Davis never left the state as best I can tell with the Jolly Green Giant. It also speaks to how massive the drag racing scene was in California in the 60s. You could run this car, or these three cars, almost endlessly and never have to cross state lines. But the big question is this. If you had to pick one of these cars to drive, which one would it be? We have a blown nitro-burning Chrysler-powered Ford, a blown nitro-burning big block Chevy Impala, and a blown nitro-burning small block Ford dragster pretending to be an acid trip of a Ford Mustang with Ford power. Is there a wrong answer? I'm Brian Loans. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more historical, fun, occasionally weird, and always dorky automotive and mechanical content.